Hello and welcome to the Plumes of Oz, where we look at the Australian birds in the wild. And today we're going to look at the funeral bird, a blackbird. Otherwise, we would call it the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. Its binomial name is Calyptorhynchus funereus, but paradoxically in the Northern Hemisphere, this bird is known as Zander funereus. I say paradoxically, for in the 1930s, Greg Matthews, an Australian zoologist, coined the term Zander as the genus for the Australian black cockatoos, whereas the term Calyptorhynchus was coined by a French zoologist, Desmarais, in the late 1800s. And in the Northern Hemisphere, they use Greg Matthews' terminology for this genus as Zander, whereas in Australia, we use the French terminology for this genus, Calyptorhynchus. Calyptorhynchus really means hidden bill, for often the feathers over the face cover the proximal part of the bill. Within the genus Calyptorhynchus, we have several black cockatoos. The glossy black, which has a combination of yellow and red markings, the red over the tail. If we go to Western Australia, we have the white-tailed cockatoos. And these are similar to the yellowtail in that the male has the pink periorbital eye ring. The red-tailed black cockatoos are quite distinctive, for though most cockatoos will feed in the trees, the black cockatoo will still feed on the ground. With the mature birds, male and female can be separated, the male having a pink or reddish coloured periorbital eye ring. This is granulated skin around the eye, whereas in the female it is grey. The colour of the bill also helps to give an indication of sex. The female has an ivory coloured bill, and as the male matures, it will go more to a charcoal. All birds in the cetaciform order are flock orientated, and this is the case for the yellow-tailed black cockatoo, and you can see here a flock alighting on a clump of coastal banksia. The area that these birds are found in Australia is mostly along the east coast, from the centre of Queensland, going all the way down along the east coast into Victoria, a little bit into South Australia, and then to Tasmania. And in this area, the main food for these birds is the banksia. The banksia tree is named after Sir Joseph Banks, and the banksia cone is tough and the seed hidden inside, and it requires a bird with a strong bill to extract the seed, and this is what the yellow-tailed black cockatoo does. Mostly we think of cetaciforms as being grass seed eaters, but this is not the case with the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. The red-tailed black cockatoo will feed on the ground, but not the yellowtail. He is an arboreal feeder, eating on fruiting seed on trees. Flocks vary in size, usually less than 40 birds. If it has been good breeding and there are a lot of young birds, the flock can be very noisy in a tree. Contrast to the tree chatter, when in flight, you can often hear them coming well before visualisation, for they have a rather mournful, distinctive call. Another seed that's very hard for a bird to feed on is that of the pine cone. And after banksia, these are the next most favourite of the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. These trees have been introduced from California and grown in plantations for timber, mostly in the coastal areas where the yellow-black-tailed cockatoo lives, and these cones are now a valuable source of food for this bird. Calls from the yellow-tailed cockatoo are in flight and then when the flock lands. Here on a grevillea, you can just hear the chatter as this flock of 16 yellow-tailed black cockatoos lands. Then there is the call of the young birds. It's a grunting call. They have been weaned but still continually call in an attempt to be fed. This young yellowtail is calling in a bigging way, hoping to get some food. But notice that the crest has minimal movement, in contrast to the red-tailed black cockatoo that has a higher forward projecting crest. And now this yellowtail has white markings over the face. A little unusual. It is a mature bird, for there is a red periorbital eye-ring that takes 3 years to develop. So the white feathers aren't down. I'm uncertain what the white markings were, whether they were guano splats or bleached feathers of an old bird. The second landing, and notice that the other bird next to it is taking a banksia cone with it as it flies off. We saw the yellowtails eating the banksia cones, but now let's go back to the pine cones. And here in the Hunter Valley, a flock of yellow-tailed black cockatoos land in Pinus australis, and the pine cones are green and extremely hard. A feature common to the black cockatoos is the large size of the bill, capable of shredding the husk of the pine cone in a few minutes to find the seed. At times you can see pine cones under the tree that have been taken off by the strength of the bill, so one has to be wary when black cockatoos are feeding above. The bill of a black cockatoo has two parts, the upper mandible and the lower mandible. The upper mandible is fused to the skull from a fibrous joint, whereas the lower mandible is an articulated joint. Hence the lower mandible, being more agile, is responsible for most of the movement when cracking seeds. Feeding is a combination of strength and dexterity. The tongue is relatively smooth and a valuable sensory organ to determine where the seed is within the husk. And like most cetaceans, the tongue is larger and more muscular than many birds, and once the seed is sensed, it is positioned with the muscular movements of the tongue between the upper and the lower mandible for the final cracking of the pericarp. A male feeding. The tail feathers on the underparts are pale yellow, and there are little black lines, giving a crisscross pattern of the underfeathers, and a slightly darker undertail to the female, where it is more pronounced. Other than pine cones, there are other hard seeds of plants in Australia that are quite distinctive, and hard, tough seeds from the hakeas, the wattles, sheoaks, and Australian cypress are all included in the diet of the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. But pine is still the most interesting of all of these. Though sheoaks have scaly-like leaves similar to pines, they do not produce resin, yet the hard seed is similar to a pine cone in a way, and also a major source of food for these birds. But the interesting thing about the pine trees is that they produce resins. Now resins are made up of isoprene molecules. Plants that have sticky resins, like that of the pine trees, are well known to most of us. A classical one is the hemp plant, and the resin stickiness is from substances called terpenes, and terpenes are formed by the isoprene molecule. Now pine trees are rather sticky with the resin, but this resin is not found in sheoaks or banksia. Notice this yellow tail. He has pulled a needle off a branch. He is eating the base of the needle, where it is attached to the wood. This is going to have a high resin component, and the resins, as I mentioned, are derived from isoprene. And now in pharmacology, we are using a lot of these isoprene or resin-derived substances, such as the taxols, as chemotherapeutic substances. And the interesting thing about the black cockatoos is that they are known for longevity. Now, I'm not advocating that we eat resins, but the pine forests in Australia have become a major source of food for the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. The tongue of the yellow-tailed black cockatoo has two colours. There is more grey on the tip of the tongue, and this is because it has more stratified epithelium, giving a tougher surface so it can manipulate the seeds. The remainder of the tongue is the typical pink colour of a tongue that has a mucus or moist surface epithelium. As in Australia, Northern Hemisphere pine cones are an important source of food for Northern Hemisphere birds. especially as it comes to winter and the pine cones open and release seeds. The greater majority of Northern Hemisphere pinecone seed is eaten by birds after the fall when the pine seeds are released, whereas in Australia the pine seeds are eaten both from the green or raw pinecone as well as the dried out open cone. Now going back and looking at the yellowtail and the banksia, remember that the banksia is not a resin-filled tree. Here, the yellow-tailed black cockatoo eating this seed is really after the protein, carbohydrates and fats associated with all seeds. And the banksia cone, just like the pine cone, will release the seeds as the weather cools or earlier if there is a bushfire. The yellow-tailed black cockatoos are one of the few birds that can extract the seed from the green banksia cone. There are feeding differences amongst the Calyptorhynchus. Firstly, with the yellowtail, it is rare for it to eat ground seed of grass or herbaceous plants, whereas the red-tailed black cockatoo will mostly feed in an arboreal fashion on eucalypt, but also ground feeds on grass seed and herbaceous seed. The glossy black cockatoo is well known for its predisposition to eat on alocasia seeds. And in Western Australia, the white-tailed black cockatoos are very similar to the yellow-tails in New South Wales, but with a much larger and diverse population of banksia trees. Finally, the undertail. Throughout this video it's been hard to see, and even in this bird eating on a banksia cone, it is seen from the opposite direction. So please go back and review this video to look at the undertail views. In essence, the undertail has black oblique markings following the oblique line of the feather vein, being more horizontal in the central rectrices. With a young yellow-tailed black cockatoo, these black lines are more pronounced, as shown on the insert. These birds do enjoy a feed on insect larvae. And earlier we saw them digging into the wood, and here you can see another bird stripping the bark back, probably from feeling the vibrations of the larva inside, eating on the decaying wood. Black cockatoos, as their name suggests, are black. Here in this still shot you can see a black adult, and below that a very pale bird. A rather rare occurrence that bird breeders would love to get their hands on. And I found this bird on the west coast of Tasmania. In the pale bird, the periorbital eye-ring is red, so it is a mature bird. And this is called leucism. And this leucistic bird has the feature that the melanin, or the skin-coloured pigment, doesn't bind with the keratin in the feather. I am uncertain as to the genetics, but because of its rarity, it is a recessive trait. On behalf of Plumes of Oz, thank you for watching this video on the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. We hope to bring you further videos of Australian birds in the wild, so for notification, subscribe to this channel.